Senator from Utah.
Ask unanimous consent to suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, shortly today, the Senate will vote on the motion to appoint conferees, or what's often called the motion to go to conference, for a bill that reauthorizes the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or the ESEA, which is the legislation governing our federal K-12 education policy. Because most Americans have probably never heard of this obscure parliamentary procedure, the motion to appoint conferees, that is, I'd like to take just a moment to explain how it works, or at least how it should work. When the House and the Senate each pass separate but similar bills, the two chambers have the ability to convene what's called a conference committee. A conference is essentially a meeting where delegates from each chamber come together to iron out any differences between their respective similar but somewhat different bills, and then put together what's called a conference report, which is a single piece of legislation that reconciles any disparities between the House-passed bill and the Senate-passed counterpart to that bill. Once the delegates to the conference, the conferees, as they're sometimes known, agree on a conference report, they bring it back to their respective chambers, to the House and to the Senate, for a final vote. It's important to note here that once the conference report is sent to the House and the Senate for a final vote, there's no opportunity to amend the legislation. It's an up or down vote. Each chamber can either approve or reject the conference report in its entirety. If each chamber votes to approve the conference report, then it's sent to the President, who can either sign it into law or veto it. So what we're doing today is voting on the motion to appoint conferees for the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Earlier this year, both the House and the Senate passed their own ESEA reauthorizations, and now we're voting to proceed to the conference process and to appoint certain senators to participate in that process as conferees. Historically, and according to the way the conference process is supposed to work, this vote is not that big of a deal. Voting on the motion to appoint conferees is usually and mostly a matter of routine. But it's not a vote that should be rushed through on a moment's notice, because it is the last opportunity for senators and representatives who are not conferees, such as myself, to influence the outcome of the conference process. We can do that by offering what are called motions to instruct the conferees. For example, let's say that I was not chosen to be a conferee on a particular bill, but there was an issue related to the bill that was important to me and to the people I represent. In that case, I could ask the Senate to vote on a set of instructions that would be sent to the conference to inform the conference's deliberations and influence the substance of the conference report. Mr. President, this is how the conference process is supposed to work. But it is not how the conference process has been conducted with respect to this bill, the Elementary and Secondary Education Reauthorization. Sure, we're still voting to appoint conferees, and those conferees will still convene a conference, and that conference will still produce a conference report. So from the surface, it will still look like the conference process is happening, is unfolding in the manner in which it's supposed to. But beneath the surface, we know that all of this has already been prearranged, pre-cooked, predetermined by a select few members of Congress working behind closed doors, free from scrutiny. And we know that this vote was scheduled on extremely short notice so that it would be difficult, if not impossible, for the rest of us to influence the substance of the conference report through motions to instruct. Now, why does this matter? We know the American people care deeply about K-12 education policy. But why should they care about this obscure parliamentary procedure in the Senate? They should care. And Mr. President, we know that they do care, because the process influences the policy. In this case, the process expedites the passage of policies that we know don't work, policies to which the American people are strongly opposed. For instance, it's my understanding that this bill would authorize $250 million in new spending on federal pre-K programs, what amounts to a down payment on the kind of universal, federally run pre-K programs advocated by President Obama. This would be a disaster, not only for American children and American families, but for our 21st century economy that increasingly requires investments in human capital. We know that a good education, starting at a young age, is an essential ingredient for upward economic mobility later in life. A mountain of recent social science research proves what experience and intuition have been teaching mankind for millennia. That is, that a child's first few years of life are critical in their cognitive and emotional development. Yet, we also know that too many of America's public schools, especially those public schools in low-income and disadvantaged neighborhoods, often fail to prepare their students to succeed. Nowhere has the top-down, centrally planned model of public education failed more emphatically than in our nation's public pre-K programs. The epitome of federal preschool programs is Head Start, which has consistently failed to improve the lives and educational achievements of the children it ostensibly serves. According to a 2012 study by President Obama's own Department of Health and Human Services, whatever benefits children gain from the program disappear by the time they reach the third grade. But because bureaucracies invariably measure success in terms of inputs instead of on the basis of actual outcomes, Head Start and its $8 billion annual budget is the model for Democrats as they seek to expand federal control over child care programs in communities all across this country. This bill also doubles down on the discredited Common Core approach to elementary and secondary education that the American people have roundly and consistently rejected. Mr. President, parents and teachers across America are frustrated by Washington, D.C.'s heavy-handed, overly prescriptive approach to education policy. I've heard from countless moms and dads in Utah who feel as though anonymous government officials living and working 2,000 miles away have a greater say in the education of their own children than they do. The only way to improve our K-12 education system in America is to empower parents, educators, and local policymakers to meet the unique needs of their communities and serve the low-income families that the status quo is leaving behind. With early childhood education, we could start block granting the Head Start budget to the states. This would allow those closest to the children and families being served to design their own programs rather than spending all their time complying with onerous one-size-fits-all mandates, and designate eligible public and private preschools to receive grants. We know this works because many states are already doing it. In my home state of Utah, for instance, the United Way of Salt Lake has partnered with two private financial institutions, Goldman Sachs and J.B. Pritzker, to provide first-rate early education programs to thousands of Utah children. They call it a pay-for-success loan. With no upfront cost or risk to the taxpayers, private capital is invested in the Utah High-Quality Preschool Program, which is implemented and overseen by the United Way. If, as expected, the preschool program results in increased school readiness and improved academic performance, the state of Utah repays the private investors with the public funds it would have spent on remedial services that the children would have needed between kindergarten and the 12th grade had they not participated in the program. Washington policymakers should not look at Utah's Pay for Success initiatives and other local success stories like them as potential federal programs, but rather as a testament to the power of state and local control, of state and local ingenuity. Mr. President, we should not expand Washington's control over America's schools and pre-K programs. Instead, Congress must advance reforms that empower parents with flexibility and with choice. to do what's in the best interest of their children. The policies in this bill, as I understand them, move in the opposite direction. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.